Okay, folks. So the second part of chapter 9, we're going to start off with temperament. Last thing we talked about was Lev Vygotsky and his emphasis on social interaction. So one of the areas that has been explored by life developmental specialists is temperament. And of course, this doesn't comply. Temperament is described as an individual's emotional reactivity and intensity to the environment. There are many components of our personality that falls under temperament. We can talk about activity level, adaptability, how quickly we adapt to new situations, whether individuals are shy or not. These are all part of one's temperament, the way we react to our environment. So if you think about, let's say you're driving down the freeway and someone cuts you off, people have one of three, maybe more, but commonly three types of reaction, right? So some people will kind of laugh it off and continue driving. Some other folks will kind of be angry and still are thinking about it, come home and is still thinking about what they should have done to the person that cut them off. And some people will chase and go right next to them and flip them off and use some profanity. So these are all part of our temperament, the way we react to our environment. Before Thomas and Chess, the individuals you see right here, the idea was that you are born as a blank slate and ultimately your environment shapes you. Thomas and Chess did this longitudinal study called New York Longitudinal Study. It's actually fascinating, where they looked at infants at the time of birth and followed these individuals into midlife. And they wanted to find out, are we born with certain temperaments? Are they part of our personalities that is shown early in life? Or do we develop these as we go through the lifespan, and does it change? They found that temperament is only one aspect of our personality, and it is rooted in biology. What that means is that your temperament, whether you're shy or adapt to new situations easily and speedily, may be in part of your genetic makeup. So they have looked at this identical twins and fraternal twins. Identical twins share the same exact genes, and they have found them to be more similar than fraternal twins who have different genetic makeup. So after their study, they came up with actually 4, but for the exam, you only need to know these 3. What you will see on the exam is I'm going to give you a case vignette of an infant, and you need to figure out what type of temperament the child is exhibiting. Not very creative, but they called these temperament types easy, difficult, and slow to warm up. And really the key difference between them is this idea of adaptability. How quickly do these infants and toddlers and children adapt to new situations? So what they found with easy kids, these kids adapted easily to new situations. So if, let's say you change their babysitter, they may protest a little bit at the beginning, but they will easily adapt to the change in their caregiver. They tend to have regular bodily function, meaning you can predict when they're going to take a nap, when they need to be fed. They have a routine. And these are overall just happy kids. These are the kids you go pick them up from their nap and they're smiling, reaching out for the parent. Difficult kids is exactly the opposite, just like the name indicates. Difficult kids have a really, you guessed it, difficult time adapting to new situations. They don't like change, so that when they are given a new situation, a new babysitter, a new school, they will react negatively and intensely to the change. They also have irregular bodily function. Very grumpy when they wake up. It takes them a while to kind of wake up and be happy. Slow to warm up kids are somewhere in between. And the key here, make sure you mark this down, slow to warm up kids. If you introduce them to a new situations slowly, they will adapt fine, right? So if, let's say, you're enrolling your child in a daycare and everyone in the daycare is brand new. Easy kids, if you go a week after school starts, the easy kids are already in their groups, playing, laughing, no problem. Difficult kids, you find usually one or two that are in the corner crying and trying to, waiting for their parent to come back or attached to their teacher. And slow to warm up kids are in the periphery, kind of watching other kids. They're not crying, they're just slowly trying to adapt to this new environment. So these are some of the differences in temperament. And what they found is you can have a difficult child, and with patience and care and really patience, you can make them as easy as possible. They will never be like easy kids, but their difficulty, their ability to adapt to new situations will lessen, meaning they will adapt a little bit more easier than if you hadn't intervened. The other area that we need to look at is what we call attachment. We have all kinds of attachments. Some of you are attached to your pets. Some of you are attached to your maybe animals. But attachment, what we're going to talk about here, is an emotional tie between the child and the caregiver. Some of the key players that you need to know for the exam is John Bowlby, right here. John Bowlby is considered the father of attachment. Please make sure you know that for the exam. John Bowlby is considered the father of attachment. And then we're going to look at Harry Harlow and Mary Ainsworth. So to give you a kind of a background information, a historical perspective on attachment and how important we found that it was, early to mid 1900s, the field of psychology was dominated by really two big gurus, the twin towers of psychology at the time, which was Watson and Freud. Both of these folks did not look at attachment as in depth as we should have. They only mentioned that as long as you reduce a child's drive. So by drive, they meant basic biological need. When the child is hungry, you reduce that drive. If the child is thirsty, you reduce that drive. The child will grow to be a healthy, socially and psychologically healthy adult who will have attachment and will do just fine. Watson, as a matter of fact, said, do not hold your babies because you will spoil them. So the idea was that as long as you feed a child, you meet their basic needs, they will be perfectly healthy, healthy adults. Couple of problems with this. Let me go back for a second. If you remember John Bowlby from the last slide, John Bowlby was also trained as a psychodynamic, was believed in Freud's drive reduction theory, except a couple of things happened in early 1900s. We have World War II. Because of World War II, there was a lot of children who were orphaned. Their parents died, and they were put in these large orphanages in Europe. And they couldn't figure out for the life of them why many of these infants began to die in orphanages, even though they were fed. The older kids also had some serious social problems, psychological issues. They were exhibiting some disturbances. So the World Health Organization hired John Bowlby to take a look and see what was happening with these kids. And Bowlby, one of the areas he explored was this idea of attachment. So he went and looked at how important attachment was and made us question the way we look at attachment, how it forms and how important it is. Thus, he's considered the father of attachment. If you take the lifespan class, you will look at this much more in depth. But he really started the wheel of examining attachment. In the United States, 1930s and 40s were hitting the Great Depression. Folks did not have enough money to feed their kids. So they were dropped off at orphanages, and the idea was if the child has any kind of, as long as their drive is reduced, right? As long as these orphanages are feeding the babies and really just meeting their basic needs, they will be healthy, happy children, and they should be fine. So there was an increase in the number of kids in orphanages, and the number of caregivers for them, the ratio was way off. So you found these kids that were kind of, especially infants, that were kind of lingering in these large institutionalized orphanages. And what these orphanages found was some of these babies were dying for no apparent reason. They were being fed, all their basic needs was met, but they were not flourishing and they were wasting away and dying. So they hired a guy by the name of Rene Spitz, S-P-I-T-Z. If you're interested, you can look at YouTube and take a look at some of the footage that he has from these orphanages. So Spitz went in and thought these kids are basically wasting away, even though they're being fed. So he did he released his footage, his video that he took. The turning point was really when Harry F. Harlow did this experiment with rhesus monkeys called contact comfort experiment. Unfortunately, I can't click on this. The videos are not, the sound isn't coming up, but I will put up the video so you will see this. After I explain what he did, please stop the lecture and go back and watch the video and come back for the next one. I'll tell you when to stop. So Harry Harlow does this experiment where he separates these rhesus monkeys away from their parents, away from their mothers, right very close after they're born, and puts them in these cages. In the cages, you have two surrogate mothers. One mother is a wire monkey, you'll see that in the video, where all it does is just basically feed the baby, kind of supporting that drive reduction theory. The other mother, surrogate mother figure, is wrapped in cloth, is warm, has big eyes, does not feed the baby at all, does not reduce its drive. It's just a source of comfort for the baby. So they wanted to see if when the baby gets scared, who does the baby spend more time with? Who does the baby get contact comfort from? So please stop the lecture here and go back and watch the video and come back. Okay, so for those of you that watched it, it's pretty disturbing to see these baby monkeys in these cages. What they don't show you in the video is many of these baby monkeys died. They, just like Rene Spitz found, they wasted away even though they were being fed. And today we call this condition non-organic failure to thrive, which is basically heartbreak from lack of comfort and physical contact with one's caregiver. So Harry Harlow releases that. At the same time, there are folks like Konrad Lorenz, who you do not need to know for the exam. So all the stuff that we talked about, you need to know. If you don't need to know it, I'll tell you, you don't need to know it. All the stuff we talked about, make sure you know. So Konrad Lorenz, you don't need to know, but he really studied animals and found this idea of imprinting, which you don't need to know, so I'll just skip it. But because of these early or not early, but because of the research that was done by Harlow, Konrad Lorenz, Rene Spitz, today in the United States, there are no orphanages anymore. They're all closed. So if babies need to be taken in, they are put in foster homes where they have that one-on-one contact. Now, the other person you need to know for the exam is Mary Ainsworth, who was one of Bowlby's students, a graduate student under Bowlby, and she was also interested in attachment. Both of them believe that attachment is an instinctive ability that we have very early on in humans, and it is crucial for our survival. So Mary Ainsworth came up with types of attachment. There are 4 altogether. Of the 4, you need to know 3. She put together this experimental method called strange situation method. Make sure you know that for the exam. Strange situation method to measure is not the right way, to assess one's attachment type. So what she wanted to know, is it that humans attach or not attach, or are there different types of attachment? So in Mary Ainsworth attachment or strange situation method, she had a number of mothers come in, caregivers, which were at that time all mothers, come in and with their infants, which ranged anywhere from 9 to 18 months of age, and she would put them into this situation in a room where there was a one-way mirror, And the observers, the experimenters, were on one side, and they would watch the interaction between the mother and their infants. And in the room, they had tons of toys where the kids could play. So what basically you need to know for the exam, and also the main part of strange situation method, the psychologists or the researchers were interested in how the baby reacted when the mother got up and left, and how did she or he react when he came back. Now, Ainsworth did this experiment where she had the mother leave and come back. There's 18 different scenarios where this poor kid was tortured. But for our class, we're interested in the baby's reaction when the mother left, and how does she react or he react to the mother's return. From this experiment came 4 different types of attachment. Again, you need to know 3 of them. And what this was able to give us, this type of experiment, was the type of attachment. What the researchers realized is that it's not that we attach or not attach, but there's different types. So the first type of attachment that they talked about was what we call secure attachment, right? It's a larger category, and thank God for us, most of the kids fell under secure attachment. In secure attachment, these securely attached infants kind of were upset when the mother left, cried, not dramatically, was just kind of cried and were upset. And when the mother came back, the mom picked the baby up, and the baby was easily soothed by the mother's return, so that the mother acted as a comfort for the baby. So that's secure attachment. Unfortunately, the other 3 types, which you only need to know these 2, fall under the larger category of insecure attachment. In insecure attachment, there's 2 different types of insecure attachment. You have what's called insecure avoidant attachment. And these kids, the infants and the mothers, came in, and the infant immediately separated from the mom and began to play. When the mother left, the baby was the least distressed by her departure, kind of looked and continued to play, didn't cry at all. When the mother came back, the baby kind of looked, whatever, and continued. It was as if the baby was avoiding any kind of interaction with the mother. That's avoidant attachment. In ambivalent or resistant, they're interchangeably used. These babies and mothers came in. It took the baby a long time to separate from the mother and began to play. When the mother left, the baby had an absolute fit, was super upset. And when the mother came back, she was unable to comfort the baby. It was one of 2, and interestingly enough, one of 2 drastic differences. Either the baby began to ran to the mom when the mom came back and began to push her or hit her. But in either case, the mother was unable to soothe the baby and bring down their level of distress. So those of you that are going to be going to take the MCAT, which is an entrance exam for medical school, you will see this, you may see and probably will see this question in terms of attachment types for the infant. So on the exam, I will give you a scenario and baby's reaction to the mother, and need to figure out which type of attachment we are talking about. This is a quick kind of synapse of what we're talking about, the different type of attachment. You all have this. The only 3 you need to know are these 3, the secure, resistant, ambivalent, and avoidant. You do not need to know disorganized or disoriented. The other area we're going to look at is Erik Erikson psychosocial development. If you look on your study guide, you need to know 4 of his 8 stages. And the first 2 you need to know for the exam are these 2, right? You don't need to know the last 2. So what you need to know is the name of the stage, the age that that stage or stage spans. So Erikson said that we develop our social personality through our interaction with our environment, and specifically our caregiver. Depending on how the caregiver takes care of us or the infant will either have a positive or a negative outcome in each stage. And if you look at his stages, it's A versus B, A versus B. Usually, not usually, but the one on the left-hand side is the positive outcome from that stage versus the right-hand side, which is the negative outcome. So he said for the first year of life, from 0 to 1, the child will learn either to trust that someone in their environment will care for them, that they can always depend on someone in their environment, versus mistrust, that I don't have anyone in my environment that I can depend on regularly to take care of me. So how does this develop? Let's say a baby is crying, the mother comes and feeds the baby. Every time the baby cries, the mother feeds it. Every time the baby's discomfort, the mother meets its need. The baby will learn a sense of trust. There's someone in my environment that whenever I'm in distress will meet my needs. Now, if the mother was, let's say, on drugs, unfortunately, or severely depressed where they couldn't get out of bed, sometimes they feed the baby and other times they won't. That will equate to, or that the outcome will be mistrust, the sense that I can depend on someone in my environment to take care of me. It is undependent. No one will meet my needs on a daily basis. So that was the first stage. The second stage is what he called autonomy versus shame and doubt, which spans from 1 to 3. Again, you need to know this for the exam. Autonomy, if you remember, by 1, most kids should be walking. They have enough ability, physical ability to begin to walk and kind of explore their environment. So that if the child will exercise that autonomy and begin to walk away, will the parent encourage them and kind of walk behind them? If you've ever gone to the mall, you can see kids kind of walking and the parents walking behind them. Well, according to Erikson, if you allow the child to explore their environment, they will get a sense of autonomy. I can do things. I can dress myself somewhat. I can do things by myself. However, if you make the child feel shameful or doubt their ability to be independent, then you have the negative outcome. That's from 1 to 3. The other 2 you don't need to know. If you take a lifespan class, they'll go over that in depth. The next thing we need to talk about is parenting styles. This psychologist out of San Francisco named Diana Baumrind wanted to know if there are different types of parenting styles, or are everyone parenting about the same. She looked at 4 aspects of parental behavior: how restrictive the parents are with their kids, do they demand for their kids to achieve intellectual, emotional, social maturity, do they communicate with their kids, and are they warm and loving? So she looked at all different types of parents with these 4 in mind. And what she found was 4 different style of parenting. I promise you, you will see at least 2 of these on the test. So please make sure you know this for the exam. So if you keep in mind those 4 aspects of parental behavior, authoritative parents, these parents are strict, so they're demanding their kids to be mature, they put restriction on them. They're also warm and loving towards their kids. And really the hallmark of authoritative, the first one, authoritative style of parenting, is that they communicate with their kids. So if they give their kids a restriction, they will tell them why they're giving them the restriction. So let's say if your child is now driving and they want to take the car out, authoritative parents will tell their kids, your curfew is, let's say, at 12. If you come more than 5 minutes late, your car will be taken away for a week, let's say, so that the child knows what the consequences are and is usually not surprised by the discipline. In authoritarian style of parenting, these parents are extremely rigid in their rules, and really the basic hallmark of authoritarian style of parenting is that they believe they are the parents, you are the child, and you do as I say. There's no questioning, there's no why with these parents. They demand obedience for the sake of obedience. There's no communication. Many can be cold, but they sure as heck don't feel like they need to communicate why they're giving a child a restriction. So if you've ever seen authoritarian style parenting, their favorite saying is, because I said so. So why can't I do this? Because I said so. Authoritarian style parenting is practiced a lot in collective cultures. For example, Japanese, my culture, Iranian culture practices authoritarian style of parenting. There's a clear hierarchy between parents and their kids, and it works for them. Permissive parents, these parents impose very few rules, and they really don't supervise their kids very closely. And it could be two different type of permissive parents that, let's say, give rules. You came late and you can't use the car for a week, and the next day the kid is driving a car, right? So even when they put rules, they're not really good about kind of following up on it. Or they just believe that kids shouldn't have rules. They should learn from natural consequences. One of the things with permissive parents, they love the hell out of their kids. So it's not that they don't love their kids, they're just not good about following up with rules, or they just don't believe in rules. Uninvolved parents, however, we call these uninvolved or neglectful parents. These parents generally are leaving their kids to raise themselves. They're just not present. So these parents either are working all the time or just uninvolved in their kids' lives. So research has looked at the consequences. Sorry, that was just, you have this in your study guide. So when you have time, you can pause it and just kind of look and see where everyone fits. I put the graph in your study guides. So they have looked at the consequences of these kids. And what they have found is in this country, in Western individualized country, authoritative style of parenting works best for the kids. These kids tend to be very self-sufficient, self-reliant, they have high self-esteem, they can work in different social situations really well, they have good social competence, and are achievement motivated. The other kids, again, in this country with that European style of parenting, authoritarian doesn't really work well. These kids tend to be either aggressive or withdrawn. In permissive, because the kids haven't been given rules or restrictions, they tend to be more impulsive, moody, aggressive, and less mature in social settings. And the worst outcome, unfortunately, is for the uninvolved parents. Because there has been no parental monitoring, these kids are raising themselves and can get themselves into trouble with delinquency and such. So these are the parenting styles and the outcome of the parents. So in moving on to adolescence, we know this stage is, there's rapid physical development during this stage. Brain is developing fast. You don't need to know this for the exam, but the lower part of the brain, what we call the reptilian brain, is connecting really well to the cerebral cortex. Kids are getting better at controlling their impulses, making more rational decisions. Please make sure you know this for the exam. The brain, if you remember from chapter 2, the frontal lobe is the last to develop, and that doesn't finish developing until 25. We see a rapid development between 14 and really 16, 17. It will slow down in its pruning and maturation, but it's still continuing until 25. Because kids, early adolescents, the frontal lobe isn't fully developed, they tend to make really poor judgment in their action. They have poor insight and reasoning ability. 3 limitations that we see in adolescence, and you got to know all 3 of them for the exam. The first one is egocentrism, which also leads to imaginary audience and personal fable. Egocentrism is the inability to take another's perspective. The adolescents tend to see the world from their point of view, and really, one of the reasons, if you've ever dealt with adolescents, quite often people ask them, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to study? Where do you want to go to school? So we're asking the adolescents to really self-reflect and know about their desires and their goals in life. So it's not unsurprising that they would be egocentric and really self-examine. Unfortunately, two of the limitations during this age, and we see it more in early adolescence than late adolescence, is this idea of imaginary audience. This is the adolescent's belief that everyone's watching them. So that's why it takes the adolescents forever to get out of the house, because when they do, they are the center of attention. For some folks that never disappears, but for most folks that will disappear about 18, 19. Personal fable is the belief that one's feelings or ideas are special and that he or she is invulnerable. And this is really what makes adolescence super dangerous. During this time, adolescents believe that, let's say their friend is drinking, gets in a car accident, and if you ever ask them, they'll tell you, well, he or she was stupid. That can never happen to me. The idea that bad things can happen to others, but that can never happen to me, which is good for that stage because they take risks and they need to take risk in order to learn about life. But they may take dangerous risks. And that's, again, what makes adolescence kind of super dangerous during this period. Let's see. What you need to know for the exam, I'm going to start off here. This is the third stage of Erikson you need to know. Erikson called adolescent stage ego identity versus role diffusion. Again, this is a time of self-reflection. So according to Erikson, this is a time where adolescents will learn about who they are, right? So this idea of identifying their ego, identifying who they are in the world. What do I want to do? What am I interested in? What are my beliefs? So it's not at all uncommon that adolescents during this age will question their parents and will kind of get into arguments. It's not that they're trying to really, well, they may be trying to really piss off their parents, but mostly it's because they're trying to figure out how much of your belief I'm going to take and how much of it is mine. So it's constant questioning and trying on different roles and such. If the parent allows the child to kind of explore and look at their world, they will figure out who they are and who they aren't. If the parent suffocates the child, meaning they won't let them explore their environment, who they are, then unfortunately what you have is role diffusion, where the child kind of doesn't know what they want to do because they're so involved with the parents are overwhelming them. What you need to know for the exam is also, let me tell you, right here. Parents and adolescent conflict is very high during puberty, which is early adolescence. We're talking, depending on boy or girl, between 12 and 14. This is when adolescents' conflict with parents goes high. The hormones are going wild. The child wants more independence. Parents have a hard time giving them more independence. So it's a period of adjustment between 12 and 14, early adolescence. Once the hormones begin to subside and kind of calm down and the parent let go of their control over the adolescents, things tend to smooth out. We're going to move on to adulthood. Adulthood has been divided up into these three stages. What you need to know is right here for early adulthood, those of you that are between 18 to, I would say, 27, 28, you are at the height of your physical prowess, meaning you are fastest, you gain and lose weight pretty quickly, you can be out of shape and get in shape pretty quickly. If you look at athletes, what you quite often find is they're at the height of their game, especially basketball, between 24 and 28. And unfortunately, things begin to decline. Middle adulthood is between 45 and 65. What you need to know about middle adulthood is right here for women. Women undergo what we call menopause, and make sure you know the age range, which is between 45 and 55. So menopause occurs between 45 and 55, average being 50. So we see what we see during menopause is a rapid decline in hormones for the woman. There's some argument, do men also go through menopause? They call them manopause. midlife crisis, maybe psychologically, but physically, it's not the same as women. Men begin to lose testosterone late 20s already. So there's a gradual decrease where it's unnoticeable. For women, the decrease in hormones is quite rapid, and the woman begins to feel it in about 3-4 years. Late adulthood, we really don't need to know about this one. Bones are becoming brittle, skin is becoming less elastic. It's just not a good time. And this is 65 and up. Again, you don't need to know that for the exam. One of the things that has been examined is this idea of our overall cognitive development. Does it decline as we get older? Is there areas that maybe it even improves? And this is what research is telling us in terms of memory functioning. There is a decline with age, and we're going to see what type of memory specifically is being affected. But they have found 2 types of intelligence, and both of these you got to know for the exam. So crystallized, think crystal, right? Hardening. Crystallized intelligence is your accumulated knowledge over time. So as you grow older, you learn about the news, you experience things in life. Therefore, your crystallized intelligence increases. Your overall knowledge begins to increase as you get older, what we call wisdom. Unfortunately, fluid intelligence does decline as you get older, and you see a rapid decrease really at about 75. Fluid intelligence is the ability to reason speedily and abstractly. So let's say I'm 50. I get an iPhone, the latest iPhone. I don't even know what number we're on, but I get an iPhone, the newest one, and let's say someone who's 20 gets it. They're much quicker in learning how to download apps and really working with a machine versus myself. And that's what we mean by reasoning speedily and abstractly. That unfortunately will begin to decrease as we age. One of the cognitive diseases that we see in older ages is Alzheimer's. Please remember, Alzheimer's is not a natural part of aging. However, your chances of Alzheimer's does increase dramatically with age. The turning point for Alzheimer's is about 65. We see a rapid increase in numbers after 65. So if you remember, we talked about memory. Does our memory just decline as we age, or is it the different types of memory that are being affected? And what research tells us, so you got to know these two, there is a decline in recall, unfortunately. So if, let's say you're talking to your your grandfather, and you say, hey, what's the name of your next door neighbor? Your grandfather may have a hard time coming up with a name because you're asking them to recall, right? I'm asking a question and you come up with the answer all by yourself. That will begin to decline. Unfortunately, we see it kind of declining, as you can see, as early as 30s, and then it will begin to decline pretty rapidly. Recognition, however, does not. So if you were to ask your grandfather, hey, who's our next door neighbor? Was it Joe or John? Whatever. Your grandfather will easily recognize the right answer. So what that tells us is that memory is there. It's our ability to recall that information that tends to decline with age. So in terms of Erickson continued. Oops, sorry, I went too fast. What you need to know for the exam is his last stage, which is late adulthood. He talked about this pattern of behavior changing. A lot of it will depend on what culture you live in. What he called early adulthood, again, the conflict is either finding an intimate relationship versus becoming isolated and lonely. The early adult, which is 18 to about 35, really establishing their independence and standing on their own. Otherwise, you have the negative outcome. In middle adulthood, which is 45 to about 65, call this generativity versus stagnation. You do not need to know that for the exam, but this is where the person will look at their life and wants to leave something behind for the next generation, wants to generate and make an impact on the next generation. And what we quite often see is this is the age group that has the highest political voter turnout, because their need to want to contribute whatever your beliefs is into the next generation. versus you feel like your life isn't going anywhere. You're maybe missed out on some stuff. Late adulthood, this is the one you need to know for the exam. This is when he said we're facing death. So the person will look at their life and say, have I lived a life of integrity? Am I proud of leaving what I'm behind, what I'm leaving behind? Or despair sets in. I should have done this. I should have done that. I should have been less mean. And this is really the age where we see folks kind of reaching out to their loved ones, trying to heal relationships. And according to Erikson, if the elderly, late adult, is in the despair side of development, they will have a harder time basically dying, transitioning into the next life, whatever that may be, if there is one. So the last thing we need to talk about is researcher's work. Her name is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Kubler-Ross was a psychologist who worked with these young men in 1980s and 90s that were dying of AIDS. And at that time, there was no treatment, especially 80s. So if you were diagnosed with HIV, it was basically a death sentence. So she looked at their, from the time of diagnosis until they were unfortunately passed away, did they go through stages of grief? So what she found was these 5 stages, and she called it stages of death and dying. For the exam, please make sure you know all of them and the progression through each one. So he said, if, let's God forbid, someone is told they have a stage 4 cancer, the first thing most people will, the first reaction is denial. This can't be happening to me, right? I'm going to get another opinion. The diagnosis is wrong. When they realize that diagnosis in fact is correct, then comes anger. Why me? Why does this have to happen to me? The next stage after anger is bargaining. God, I swear if you take this away, I will go to church for the rest of my life. I will sacrifice a sheep, whatever the bargaining may be. And when that unfortunately doesn't work, the person will enter depression, where they're just low about their impending death. She said, if the person can accept the end, can accept death, then they will have an easier time letting go and basically dying. So there's been some studies done on this. Is this universal? Do all people go through these stages in this order? And what research is showing us that, in fact, in cultures where they see death as the ultimate goal in life, meaning this life is life of despair, and when they die, they will go and be free. They skip 1 through 4 straight out. They're accepting and they look forward to death. So it just depends on the culture. There are folks that go into bargaining and they get angry again and get depressed and begin to bargain. So it's not as clear as she had made it, unfortunately. She believed it was in stages. Research is disputing that. So we're ending with the last stage of development, which is ultimately death. I am going to put again this, it's a humorous look into the stages of death and dying. So you can please take a look at this. It'll go through the stages with a bit of humor. It's not the most delightful thing we can talk about. And that's it. I will see you all for our question and answer portion soon.